Around here, teachers earn their respect, and from what I've seen of your resume so far, you're not even close to earning yours. Principal Douglas Reeve waited for a reaction. The new hire, Naomi Adekanal, gave him none. What? You think standing there quiet is going to impress me? Sweetheart, this isn't the inner city anymore. You're at Belhaven Academy now, and around here we hold people to a standard. Without hesitation, he grabbed the paper cup of ice water off the corner of his desk and flung its contents across the room. The water hit her squarely across the chest and face, soaking her cream silk blouse in one cold, deliberate arc that dripped down onto the polished walnut floor between her shoes. Naomi didn't flinch. She looked at the puddle forming at her feet, then directly at Reeve. "I'm going to need your employee ID number, Principal Reeve." Douglas Reeve had no idea that the ID number Naomi was about to request would be the very first item on her desk as the newly appointed owner and board chair of the Belhaven Academy Trust. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely cannot miss. The coffee in Naomi's travel mug had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. She hadn't taken a single sip. She just held it, both hands wrapped around the warm ceramic, and stared through the windshield at the wrought iron gates across the street. Belhaven Academy, established 1897, 270 acres of manicured lawn, ivy-covered brick, and the kind of understated old money confidence that told you, before you had even parked, exactly what kind of families sent their children here. Her school now. The engraved bronze plaque beside the front gate still bore the name of the founding trust. By the end of the semester, that plaque would carry a very different name. She watched the morning drop-off line. Range Rovers, Volvos, the occasional discreet Mercedes, fathers in unstructured blazers, mothers with the kind of casual designer handbags that were quietly worth more than a teacher's monthly salary. Children in pressed navy uniforms filed through the gates in twos and threes, laughing at whatever 12-year-olds laugh at when they still believe the world was built entirely for them. Naomi watched them and said nothing. She had been sitting in this car for 17 minutes, not because she was nervous. She needed to see them before they saw her. She needed to understand what she was walking into before she walked into it. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She already knew who it was. Still outside, Attorney Marcus Ellery, executor of the Belhaven Acquisition Trust, 61 years old, 33 years at the same firm, and he still checked in like a worried older brother. She typed back, almost. His response came fast. "Naomi, you can still walk in there with your title announced up front. The board would prefer it. It's your building." She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Plain gray blazer over a cream silk blouse. No jewelry beyond a single pair of small gold studs. The temporary lanyard around her neck read "N. Adekanal, substitute teacher, English department. Technically inaccurate, strategically perfect." She typed, "I need to see who they really are, not who they perform to be for a new owner." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Be careful. Reeve has been running that building unchecked for 11 years. She placed the phone in her pocket, picked up her leather satchel from the passenger seat, and stepped out of the car. The main hall of Belhaven Academy smelled like lemon polish, fresh flowers, and the faint mustiness of a building that had been maintaining the exact same lavender diffusers in its front office since 1994. A young receptionist barely glanced up when she signed in. She wrote the false name on the visitor log, out of habit, and moved down the marble corridor toward the administrative wing. She had memorized the building's floor plan 4 nights ago from architectural drawings in the trust's acquisition file. She knew exactly where the principal's office was. She could hear voices before she reached the door. Loud, easy, the confident laughter of men who had never once considered that someone might be listening to them who did not already belong to their world. She knocked once on the open door and stepped inside. The office held 4 people. 2 men in their 40s standing near the credenza, coffee cups in hand, mid-laugh at whatever punchline had just landed. A third man, tall, silver at the temples, the kind of tanned, well-preserved handsomeness that had spent decades being told it was distinguished, leaning against the front edge of a massive oak desk with a paper cup in one hand and holding court. And in the corner, half hidden behind an open filing cabinet, a young administrative assistant with a stack of enrollment folders pressed against her chest, staring at the carpet like she was praying not to be noticed. Naomi stepped fully into the office. She extended the manila envelope of onboarding paperwork she had been told to deliver to the principal on her first morning. The man at the desk stopped talking. She felt his eyes on her before she heard his voice. "Hold on a second." The voice was smooth, almost polite. "Almost. You must be lost, honey." She didn't look up. She set the envelope on the corner of his desk. "I'm talking to you." His voice had shifted, still wearing its smile, but the smile had picked up an edge. "The substitute pool checks in through the front office. Not in here. Not in my office." She turned and looked at him for the first time. He was 58, maybe 60. Tailored button-down with the sleeves rolled precisely twice. A signet ring on his right hand. A framed photograph on the credenza behind him of a much younger version of himself in a rowing singlet holding a trophy above his head. The nameplate at the front of the oak said Douglas W. Reeve, head of school. His eyes moved over her slowly, taking in the blazer, the lanyard, the leather satchel, the skin, the hair, the entire arithmetic of what she was and was not, and arriving at whatever conclusion he had already decided upon before she had spoken a single word. "I found the office just fine," she said. "Thank you." One of the men by the credenza laughed under his breath. Reeve's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. "Oh, she talks," he said, louder laughter now. "Listen." He pushed off the edge of the desk and took 2 easy steps toward her. Slow, unhurried, the walk of a man who had never in his life had to move quickly for anyone. "I don't know where you did your teacher training, sweetheart, but Belhaven has a particular way of doing things. And part of that," he paused and glanced at the other men performing for them now, "is understanding your place from day one." The room went a fraction quieter. Naomi looked at him. She said nothing. She let her eyes travel once across the office, taking in the 2 silent men, the frozen assistant, the private label bottled water on the credenza at 8:30 in the morning. Then she looked back at Reeve and held his gaze. That silence, that total unshaken silence, did something to his face. A small muscle in his jaw tightened. His chin came up. He glanced over his shoulder at the other men and let a slow grin spread across his face, wide and deliberate, the kind that told an audience that whatever came next was going to be worth the price of admission. "You know what?" he said, turning back to her. "I should explain something to you since you're new. Around here we have a tradition. Every teacher who walks through those doors goes through what I like to call a little baptism." Behind him, the shorter of the 2 men, a mustached figure whose lanyard read D. Whitcomb, athletic director, let out an appreciative snort. "A baptism," Reeve continued, warm, almost fatherly. That was the worst part, how fatherly it sounded. "Just a small tradition. Reminds you where you are, reminds you who you are." He picked up the paper cup of ice water from his desk. He held it loosely at his side, swirling it just slightly so that the ice clicked against the wax. "It keeps things clear, it keeps things simple, helps everyone avoid confusion down the road." His eyes locked onto hers. The room had gone very quiet. Reeve looked back at his audience one final time, and whatever he saw in those 2 eager, grinning faces seemed to make the final decision for him. He turned back to Naomi. "Welcome to Belhaven Academy," he said, and he threw the water. The water hit her chest and neck in one cold, sweeping arc. It soaked through the cream silk of her blouse instantly, ran in thin, cold streaks down her collarbone and beneath the collar of her blazer, splashed onto the leather of her satchel, and dripped in slow, steady beads onto the polished walnut floor between her shoes. An ice cube skittered across the wood and stopped against the toe of her heel. The paper cup, now empty, dangled from Reeve's fingers. The room erupted. Whitcomb doubled over against the credenza, laughing so hard he had to steady himself with one hand. The other man, taller, thinning at the temples, slapped his own knee twice and shook his head like a person who had just witnessed the finest joke of his professional life. The laughter hit the walls of the office and bounced back off the framed diplomas and the row of yearbook spines and filled every corner of the room. Reeves stood in front of her, empty cup still extended in his outstretched hand, grinning ear to ear, waiting. He was waiting to see her face collapse. He was waiting for tears, for embarrassment, for the small, helpless flinch of a woman who did not know what to do with what had just been done to her. He got none of it. Naomi stood exactly where she was, both feet planted, shoulders level, cold water running down beneath her blouse and darkening the waistband of her trousers. A single ice cube resting against the leather of her shoe. She did not flinch. She did not blink. She did not move a single muscle in her face. She just looked at him, not with anger, not with humiliation, with something Reeve clearly had no category for. A total, iron, unbothered calm that made his grin flicker for exactly half a second before he caught it and forced it back into place. The laughter around him started to thin at the edges. Whitcomb was still laughing, but the taller man had noticed something and had stopped, and was now watching Naomi with a small, confused frown, as if he could not quite figure out why the punch line had not landed the way it was supposed to. Naomi reached up slowly with 2 fingers and brushed a rivulet of water away from the corner of her mouth, perfectly level. No trembling, no rush. Then she turned her head and looked at Reeve the way a person looks at something they are filing away permanently. "I'm going to need your employee ID number, Principal Reeve." The laughter surged back louder than before, fed by relief. Reeve barked the digits at her, 6 numbers, sing-song, mocking. Whitcomb repeated them back in a high falsetto, drawing each one out like the setup to a knock-knock joke. The other man clapped once, delighted. She memorized every digit. She memorized every face. The young assistant in the corner had not moved. She was staring so hard at the enrollment folders in her arms that it looked like she was trying to disappear into the manila. Naomi memorized her too. Then she turned and walked out of the office, back straight, steps even, one thin, cold trickle of water still tracing its way down the inside of her collar. Not one moment of hesitation. The laughter followed her all the way down the marble corridor. She let it. The women's restroom at the far end of the administrative wing was small and rarely used, tucked behind the copy room where most of the office staff never bothered to walk. Naomi locked the door behind her. The laughter from Reeves' office was still audible through the walls, muffled now, but there. Someone kept setting it off again every time it started to die down, probably Whitcomb. He had that kind of energy. The kind that needed to keep poking at something long after the moment itself had passed. She stood in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at her was composed, but the evidence was everywhere. The silk of her blouse clung to her collarbone in a dark, translucent patch. Her blazer was speckled with darker gray droplets across the lapel and shoulder. A thin, damp line ran down the outside of her right trouser leg. Her satchel, resting on the counter, bore a slick, wet streak along one side. She reached up and gently touched her hair. A few beads of water clung to the small twist just above her ear. She lowered her hand. She looked at the woman in the mirror for a long moment. She had been here before, not in this restroom, not in this building, but in this exact moment. She had been here more times than she could count. 15 years in education. 15 years of faculty lounges that went quiet when she walked in, of curriculum committees whose invitations mysteriously never quite reached her inbox, of parents at back-to-school night who looked past her for the real teacher, of being watched for any crack, any flinch, any sign that she did not belong in the room she had earned her way into. She had never given them one. She was not going to start today. She turned the cold tap. She cupped water in both hands, pressed it against the back of her neck, and let it run down under her collar to mix with what was already there. Then she straightened up and looked at herself again. She reached into the interior pocket of her satchel and pulled out a small folded microfiber cloth she kept there for exactly this kind of morning. She blotted the worst of the water from the front of her blouse, working from the outside in, slow and methodical. She patted down the front of her blazer, then the sides. She wrung out the cuffs. The blouse would not dry fully. That was fine. Leaving the darker patch of damp silk across her chest was better. It would make the next thing she was about to do more honest. She thought about Marcus Ellery's voice that morning. Be careful. She thought about Reeves' face. That wide, performed grin the second before he threw the water. The way he had looked back at his audience first, making sure they were watching. The way he had called it a baptism, a tradition, said it like he was doing her a favor, said it like he had done it 100 times before, because he had. That was the part that settled in her chest like a stone, not the water, not the laughter, the ease of it. The complete and total comfort of a man who had done this, some version of this over and over again to some version of her over and over again, and had never once in 11 years at the head of that school faced a single meaningful consequence for it. Until today. She dried her hands. She straightened her blazer. She pulled a small evidence envelope from the inside pocket of her satchel. Old habit. She had carried them since her second year of teaching, when she had learned in a middle school parking lot in another state that documentation was the difference between a story that got believed and a story that quietly disappeared. She unscrewed the cap of a small vial from the same pocket and used a clean cotton swab to blot a sample of water from the shoulder of her blazer. She sealed the swab inside the envelope, wrote the date, the time, and the location across the front in small, neat handwriting and slid it back into her bag. She took 2 photographs of herself in the mirror, the blouse, the blazer, the lanyard, time-stamped. She emailed them to a secured personal address and to Marcus Ellery. Then she looked at herself one last time. Damp collar, faint water darkening the silk, expression entirely her own. She made a decision that she felt in her whole body, the way you feel a door closing behind you. She unlocked the restroom door and walked out. The full board meeting of the Belhaven Academy Educational Trust was scheduled for 9:30 in the main conference room of the administrative wing, 1 floor above the principal's office. Naomi took the interior stairwell up alone. The stairwell walls were lined with framed black and white photographs of former headmasters, all of them men, all of them white, all of them staring out from behind their varnished frames with the mild, painted indifference of people who had never once, in the entire history of the institution they had governed, imagined someone like her walking these halls in any capacity other than domestic service. She did not look at them. She walked past. The conference room doors were closed. Through the smoked glass panel beside them, she could see the outline of figures already seated around a long table. She had been scheduled to attend at 9:30. It was 8:52. She was 38 minutes early. Good. She sat down in one of the leather wingback chairs in the small waiting area outside the doors. She took out her phone. She opened the incident report document she had drafted 3 nights ago in a hotel room across town. She reviewed her notes one final time. Then she opened a fresh email and began to type. Subject line: Formal report, incident, principal's office, Belhaven Academy, 8:19 a.m. She attached the 2 photographs she had taken in the restroom, the blouse, the blazer. She attached a photograph of the sealed evidence envelope resting on the porcelain counter. She typed steadily, professionally, every sentence factual and dated. Names, times, witnesses. The exact wording of the phrase baptism. She paused with her finger over the send button. Then she set the email to draft. Not yet. Sending it now would send it through the standard institutional channels, where it would be filtered, softened, slow-walked, and in all likelihood quietly rerouted to Reeve himself for internal handling. She knew exactly how to make sure it would be read, and by whom, and at exactly the right moment. She just needed the moment. The conference room door opened at 9:26. A young man in a charcoal suit stepped out, looked around, spotted her in the wingback, and gave her the polite, professional smile of a person who had absolutely no idea who was sitting in front of him. Ms. Adekanal, the board is ready for you. Naomi stood. She buttoned her blazer over the still damp silk of her blouse. She walked inside. The Belhaven Academy boardroom was long, quiet, and paneled in the same dark walnut as the floors downstairs. A rectangular conference table ran down the center of the room, polished to such a high gloss that the ceiling lights reflected back as soft golden ovals along its surface. 12 trustees sat around it, most of them in their 50s and 60s, all of them in the kind of quiet, expensive tailoring that did not announce itself. 2 open seats remained. One at the head of the table, one halfway down the right side. Naomi took the seat halfway down. She set her satchel at her feet. She placed her folio on the table in front of her. She folded her hands. The room kept moving around her. A trustee at the far end was finishing a slow observation about last quarter's endowment performance. Two others were murmuring to each other over a printed budget memo. A woman with silver hair pulled into a low chignon was writing something in the margin of her agenda. The conversation had the easy, unhurried authority of people who had spent their careers in rooms exactly like this one, who had built those rooms, and who could not conceive of a version of those rooms in which they were not the most important people at the table. Nobody looked at Naomi directly. A few glanced. New face. Unfamiliar suit. Faint dampness at the collar that one of them registered with the smallest fractional lift of an eyebrow and immediately dismissed as somebody else's problem. That was fine. She had not come here to be noticed yet. Marcus Ellery entered at 9:29. He came through the side door with his briefcase in one hand and his reading glasses already pushed up on his forehead. He looked at the open chair at the head of the table, then at Naomi, then back at the chair. He held her eyes for exactly half a second, and she gave him the smallest possible nod. He nodded back, almost imperceptibly, and walked to the head of the table. He set his briefcase down. He did not sit. "Good morning, everyone." His voice carried the calm weight of a man who had spent 30 years of his career executing the private trust instruments of families whose names appeared on museum wings. The murmuring at the table tapered off. "Before we begin the regularly scheduled agenda, I have an announcement that will be shared with the full faculty at the all-staff meeting on Friday, but which I want this room to hear first, since it directly concerns the governance of this institution." A few of the trustees straightened in their chairs. One set down his fountain pen. The polished professional tension of people who had just realized they were about to be told something they had not been briefed on settled quietly across the table. "As most of you know," Ellery continued, "the Whitfield Family Trust, which has held the majority controlling interest in the Belhaven Academy Educational Corporation since 1962, has been undergoing a private restructuring for the past 22 months following the passing of the last surviving Whitfield trustee. That restructuring is now complete. Effective immediately, controlling interest in the Belhaven Academy Educational Corporation, together with the deed to the main campus, all satellite properties, and the naming rights to the founding trust, has transferred in full to a new principal owner." He paused. He looked around the table at every face, one by one. "That owner is Dr. Naomi Adekanal." The room did not erupt. Boardrooms full of trustees at institutions like Belhaven Academy did not do erupting. But every single head turned. Every gaze, 12 of them, swung simultaneously toward the woman in the gray blazer halfway down the right side of the table. The faint, darker patch of damp silk at her collar caught the light. Naomi did not move. She kept her hands folded. She kept her expression neutral. She let them look. Ellery kept going, his voice unhurried and precise. "Dr. Adekanal holds a bachelor's from Spelman, a master's in curriculum design from Stanford, and a doctorate in educational leadership from Columbia Teachers College. She spent 7 years teaching secondary English in 3 separate public school systems before founding, at the age of 32, a network of independent college preparatory academies in the Midwest that currently serves approximately 14,000 students across 6 states, and which has been ranked in the top 3% of independent secondary networks in the country for the last 4 consecutive years." He paused. In addition to her professional record, Dr. Adekanal is the granddaughter of Dr. Beatrice Whitfield Adekanal, who was, from 1954 to 1961, one of the first black instructors ever quietly employed by this institution under the initials-only faculty policy that was in place at the time, and who was, upon her forced departure from the school in the spring of 1961, the subject of the incident that led the Whitfield Family Trust to establish the private endowment fund whose accumulated returns have, over 64 years, made this acquisition possible. The silence in the room had changed character entirely. It was no longer the silence of polite professional surprise. It was the silence of 12 people recalibrating in real time everything they thought they had understood about the institution they had been governing for most of their adult lives. Ellery sat down. He looked at Naomi. "Dr. Adekunle, would you like to say a few words?" She unfolded her hands. She stood slowly, with the same calm she had carried out of Douglas Reeve's office 31 minutes earlier. She buttoned her blazer. The faint damp patch on her blouse remained visible just above the lapel, and she did not attempt to hide it. "Thank you, Marcus." Her voice was even, measured, the voice of a woman who had been preparing for this specific morning for the better part of 2 years and had no intention of rushing through it. "I will keep this brief. My grandmother taught in this building for 7 years. She was never once permitted to enter through the front entrance. She was required to use the service door beside the kitchens. Her students did not know her real name. She was listed on the faculty roster as B. Adekunle, instructor, and when she was terminated in the spring of 1961 following a private complaint from the father of a student who had discovered her identity, she was not given a formal hearing, a reference letter, or a final paycheck. She was told to collect her personal effects from the kitchen entrance within 1 hour. She paused. She spent the remaining 41 years of her life teaching in a public high school 4 miles from this campus. She never spoke about Belhaven Academy. I learned about her 7 years here from a folder of her personal papers that was delivered to my mother the week after she died. My grandmother did not build this moment. She did not ask for it. She simply taught for 7 years in a building that would not say her name. Naomi looked slowly around the table. "I am going to say it now. Beatrice Adekunle. She is going to be named formally and permanently on the front entrance of this building before the end of this academic year. That is not a request. That is the first thing I intend to do as the owner of this school. Everything else follows from it." She sat back down. Across the table, a trustee in his late 60s named Harold Pennington cleared his throat. He had been on the board for 29 years. He had known the Whitfield family personally. He looked at Naomi for a long moment. Then he stood slowly and placed one hand flat on the polished walnut in front of him. "Dr. Adekunle," he said. His voice was quieter than it had been all morning. "I served on the search committee that hired Douglas Reeve 11 years ago. I want you to know before we go any further that I intend to submit my resignation from this board by the end of the day. Not because I disagree with a single word you have just said, but because it is long past time this room contained different people. I would like to make it easier for you to bring them in." He sat down. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She gave him the smallest, most careful nod. "I would prefer you stay, Mr. Pennington, for 6 months. Long enough to help me understand where the bodies are buried." Pennington almost smiled. "Almost. Understood." Marcus Ellery moved the meeting on to the formal transfer of controlling documents. Naomi listened. She signed where she was asked to sign. She initialed where she was asked to initial. She did not speak again for the next 48 minutes. And the entire time in the back of her mind, a clock had started running. 1 floor below, Douglas Reeve was still laughing. He had no idea. The meeting adjourned at 10:39. The trustees filed out in small clusters, a few of them lingering near Naomi's chair as the room emptied, performing the careful diplomatic dance of people who had just learned that their professional landscape had shifted and were now calculating, with the speed of long practice, how to position themselves within the new terrain. The silver-haired woman with the low chignon approached her first. She extended her hand. "Dr. Adekunle, Vivienne Marchetti. I sit on the curriculum subcommittee. I look forward to working with you." Naomi shook her hand. The grip was firm. The eyes were direct. Vivienne Marchetti was not performing. She was one of the ones who was going to stay. Naomi filed her away. She thanked her. 2 others came by, both polite, both careful, both making mental notes at exactly the speed she was making them. When the room finally cleared, Marcus Ellery closed the door and walked back to where Naomi was gathering her folio. He stood across the table from her with a particular tightness in his shoulders that she had come to recognize over the past 22 months. "What happened in his office this morning?" She looked up. "How did you hear?" "I didn't hear specifics." I heard the front office receptionist has just filed a work order for facilities to bring a wet vac and a mop to the head of school's office at 8:31 a.m. for what she described as, quote, spilled beverage. I have known Douglas Reeve for 11 years, Naomi. That man does not spill beverages in his own office. He threw a cup of ice water at me. She said it the way she would describe a paragraph in a contract. Approximately 6 ounces. Full contact across the chest and neck. He had an audience of 2 men and 1 assistant. He referred to the act as a baptism and a tradition. She paused. It is not, I have come to understand, the first time he has done this to someone new. Marcus closed his eyes for 1 full second. Terminate him today. I will draft the paperwork before lunch. Not yet. He opened his eyes. Naomi. Not yet, Marcus. She kept her voice low even and her eyes on his. If I terminate Douglas Reeve today, every faculty member in this building who has watched him operate for 11 years, every teacher who has laughed at the right joke, every department chair who has looked the other way, every assistant who has filed a wet vac request and kept her mouth shut, every one of them goes underground. They close ranks. I spend the next year fighting a war I cannot see against people I cannot name in a building I do not yet understand. She set her folio on the table. I need to see the whole shape of it first. Who protects him? Who has been hurt by him? How deep it runs and whether anyone inside this building has been quietly keeping records. Then we move. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. She could see the conflict in his face. The trust executor who wanted to act on principle. The friend who did not want to watch her get hurt on her way to the office she had earned. The lawyer who understood with reluctance that her strategic instinct was sound. How long? 72 hours to map it, then I move. He exhaled slowly. 72 hours, after that I act with you or without you. That's all I need. He nodded once. He picked up his briefcase. At the door he paused without turning around. Naomi, I have wanted you in this building for 2 years. I do not want to lose you in your first week because Douglas Reeve was too small a man to recognize what had just walked into his office. You won't. He left. Naomi sat back down at the empty conference table. She looked at the 12 empty chairs, the polished walnut, the soft gold light pooling on the surface of the table. Then she pulled out her phone, opened the draft incident report from earlier, and adjusted the recipient line. She removed the general HR email. She added a single new name, Elaine Boateng, Director of Human Resources and Faculty Compliance. Then she added Marcus Ellery. She set the email to send at 11:45 a.m. exactly, which gave her 41 minutes to make one more stop before it landed. She gathered her folio and her satchel. She took the interior stairwell down to the basement level, where the faculty compliance office had its cramped, low-ceilinged suite in a corner of the building that most of the faculty had never had reason to visit. She had memorized the directory 4 nights ago. She had been thinking about Elaine Boateng since she had first reviewed the school's personnel records during the acquisition due diligence, and had noticed a particular pattern in the resignation letters and exit interviews that had passed through Elaine's office over the past decade. Elaine was, by every available indication, the only senior administrator at Belhaven Academy who had been quietly trying to do something about Douglas Reeve. The wet vac requests. The resignation letters that referenced unspecified workplace climate concerns. The exit interview transcripts that had been redacted before reaching the trust's oversight file. All of them had crossed Elaine's desk, and many of them carried her handwritten margin notes flagged for follow-up that had never come. She had been waiting, Naomi suspected, for someone to arrive at the top of the building who could finally do the following up. Naomi reached the basement level and walked down the narrow corridor. Elaine Boateng's office door was open. The woman behind the desk was in her early 50s. Her hair was pulled back into a short natural. She wore gold-rimmed reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was reading a document in a manila folder. She looked up when Naomi appeared in her doorway. She set the folder down very slowly. "Dr. Adekanal," she said. Her voice was professional. Her eyes were not. "Please come in. Close the door." Naomi stepped inside and closed it behind her. Elaine Boateng's office was smaller than Naomi had expected for a director-level role. One narrow window looking out onto an internal maintenance courtyard, a desk that had clearly seen at least 15 years of steady use, two visitor chairs, and every available inch of the back wall from floor to ceiling was covered in legal-grade filing cabinets, each one bearing a small label on the front in handwritten block letters. Naomi took it all in with one sweep of her eyes and understood in a single second that she had come to the right place. "Sit down, Dr. Adekanal." Naomi sat. Elaine studied her for a long moment from across the desk, not the polite studying of a director meeting the new owner. The careful, evaluating studying of a woman who had been waiting a long time for someone to walk through her door and was now deciding in real time whether the woman who had finally arrived was actually the one. "You went to the head of school's office this morning." "I did, Douglas Reeve." "Yes." Elaine leaned back in her chair. Her hands rested on the arms. Her fingers were steady. "Tell me what happened, not the version you would put in a formal report." "The version that happened," Naomi told her. She told it the way Elaine had asked for it, in plain, unrehearsed language. The paper cup, the water, the laughter, the assistant in the corner, the word baptism. Elaine listened without interrupting. She did not take notes. She did not nod or react. She simply listened with the complete, uninterrupted attention of a woman who had heard variations of this story before, more times than she wanted to count, and intended to hear this version of it cleanly. When Naomi finished, Elaine was quiet for several seconds. Then she stood up, walked to one of the filing cabinets behind her desk, the third from the left, second drawer down, and unlocked it with a small key she took from around her neck. She pulled out a thick accordion folder, brought it back to the desk, and set it down between them. 14 years, she said. "I have been the director of human resources and faculty compliance at this school for 14 years. I have watched Douglas Reeve escalate from a first-year head of school who screamed at a music teacher until she wept in the parking lot in his second month, to a headmaster who, by my count, has driven 11 faculty members out of this building in the last 8 years alone." She opened the accordion folder. Inside were 11 subfolders, each one labeled with a name. She turned them so Naomi could read them. Marielle Duplessis, French Department, resigned 2017. Cited family reasons. Her exit interview referenced hostile interactions with administrative leadership that were redacted before the file went to the board. I have the unredacted version. Terrence Osei, Mathematics, resigned 2018, transferred to a public magnet school across town. Filed a confidential complaint 11 days before he left that was, according to the official record, withdrawn voluntarily. I have a copy of the original. He did not withdraw it voluntarily. She kept going. 11 names, 11 stories, each one with the same shape, disproportionately black, disproportionately women, disproportionately young, each departure preceded by a documented pattern of humiliation followed by a smoothing over followed by silence. "And each one of these," Naomi said quietly, "crossed your desk. Each one of these crossed my desk." Elaine's voice was even. "And in each one of these I did what I could within the boundaries of my authority. I flagged, I memorialized, I followed up. I escalated to the board in 4 separate cases. In each case, the response I received was that the matter had been handled through alternative channels. Douglas Reeve, you should understand, Dr. Adekanal, has a sponsor on this campus, a senior figure who has been protecting him since before he was hired." Naomi had already known. She had suspected from the moment she had reviewed the 11-year-old hearing committee minutes and noticed a particular name repeated across the recommendation letters. "Whitcomb." Elaine nodded once. "Douglas Reeve is married to Deborah Whitcomb's older sister. Deborah Whitcomb is the athletic director. He was one of the 2 men in the office this morning." Naomi absorbed it without expression. "Does the relationship appear anywhere in the personnel file?" "Nowhere. It has never been formally disclosed. It is technically not a policy violation because Mr. Whitcomb has never personally sat on Mr. Reeve's performance review committee. He has simply made sure for 11 years that the trustees who did sit on those committees understood the political weather in this building." Naomi looked at the 11 folders on the desk. Then she looked up at Elaine. "Why are you giving me these now?" Elaine's expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. "Because I read every document that came through the Whitfield Trust restructuring, Dr. Adekanal. I read your name. I read your grandmother's name. And when I read your grandmother's name, I knew that for the first time in 14 years, the person walking into the head of school's office was someone who was actually going to open the folder if I put it on her desk." She slid the accordion across the surface of the desk. "Open the folder." Naomi took it. The weight of it was substantial. She thought about the assistant in the corner of Reeves' office, the one clutching the enrollment files. She thought about the damp silk against her collar. She thought about 11 names and the dozens more, almost certainly, who had not become folders because they had left too quietly to even be noticed. "I am going to need everything you have," she said. "Not just these 11, everything, every margin note, every escalation memo, every redacted exit interview, every wet vac request from his office going back to the day he was hired. It is already pulled. I started pulling it the day I received the trust restructuring notice. It will be on your desk by end of day, accessible only to you and to me until you indicate otherwise. Thank you, Elaine." Elaine looked at her for a long moment. "Don't thank me, Dr. Adekanal, do something." Naomi stood. She left. In the corridor, she pulled out her phone, opened the draft incident report she had scheduled for 11:45 and changed the send time. Now, the email left her phone at 11:11 a.m. 2 floors above, Douglas Reeve had 20 minutes left of believing he had gotten away with it. She took the stairwell back up to the main floor and walked directly to his office. The corridor outside the administrative wing was quieter than it had been at 8:30. The 2 men who had been laughing were gone. The assistant, whose name plate she noted this time, Camila Rojas, administrative coordinator, was at her desk staring at her monitor with the careful immobility of a woman trying very hard to look busy. Camila looked up just once. Her eyes met Naomi's. Naomi saw in that half-second exactly what she had needed to see. Camila Rojas had watched a man throw a cup of ice water at a woman in his office at 8:19, and she had not said a word. And she had been thinking ever since about the fact that she had not said a word. And the look she gave Naomi now was the look of a person who would say a word the next time, if the building gave her any reason at all to believe that her word would land somewhere safe. Naomi filed it away. She kept walking. Reeves' door was closed. Through the smoked glass, she could see him at his desk on the phone, leaning back in his leather chair with one foot propped against the edge of the oak, laughing at whatever the person on the other end of the line had just said. She knocked once and opened the door without waiting. He looked up. His face went through 3 distinct expressions in under 2 seconds. The initial irritation of a man being interrupted. The flash of recognition. And then, as the door clicked shut and she stepped fully into the office, the slower, much more uncertain settling of a man who was beginning to register that the woman in front of him was not behaving the way a soaked substitute teacher should be behaving. He ended the call without a word. "Couldn't stay away, sweetheart." Naomi sat down in the chair across from his desk. She set her satchel on the floor beside her. She crossed her hands in her lap. She did not return the smile. "Mr. Reeve, I want to give you the courtesy of hearing this from me directly before it reaches you through other channels. At 11:11 a.m. this morning, I submitted a formal incident report to the Director of Human Resources and to Trust Council documenting what occurred in this office at 8:19. The report includes 2 photographs, a sealed physical evidence sample, the names of 3 witnesses, and a formal request for a comprehensive review of your conduct across your 11-year tenure at this institution. In addition, at 9:30 this morning, I was formally introduced to the board as the new controlling owner of the Belhaven Academy Educational Corporation. The announcement will be made to the full faculty on Friday. My grandmother taught in this building. Her name was Beatrice Adekanal. Before the end of the academic year, her name will be on the front of it. Yours will not." She watched his face. The color left it in visible stages. Neck first, then jaw, then forehead. His hand went slowly, involuntarily, to the small silver signet ring on his right hand and began turning it. She stood. She picked up her satchel. "You will hear from compliance by the end of the day." She walked to the door. She did not look back. In the outer office, Camila Rojas was watching. Naomi gave her the smallest possible nod. Camila nodded back. 12 weeks later, the front entrance of Belhaven Academy bore a new engraved bronze plaque. Beatrice Decanal Hall, Est 1897, renamed 2026. Douglas Reeves' state license was under review. 11 names had become a settlement fund. Camila Rojas was in graduate school, tuition paid. And Naomi walked through the front doors every morning, past a name that had waited 65 years to be spoken. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Peace.